all units proceed to your post assignments. All units proceed to your post assignments.
What are you laughing about? This is a time for seriousness, no frivolity.
Well, you played the music, the Star Spangled Banner.
Yeah.
And one of my dogs decided they were going to do the dog trick of twirling on the rug.
Oh, is that in honor of
I
our
have no
nation?
idea if it was a coincidence or whatever, but it was funny. So that's why I was laughing.
All right. Well, welcome to Ask the Inspector. We do this every Friday night. This is what we call the loquacious version because Scott gives very extensive answers, and we generally do it for about 2 hours and get to as many of those questions as possible. So we'll get right to that in a minute. Just want to mention that the Rage Against the War Machine rally is in Washington this Sunday. Scott was to have spoken at it, but he was uninvited, and he wrote his speech, and we published it on Substack, got a great response, and people said, well, you should record it. So we did. And Sunday at noon, which is a half an hour before the scheduled start of the rally, we are going to stream live Scott's speech. And you can see it in all the usual places. We stream to YouTube, Facebook, Rumble, Twitter, and Twitch. And you can get the links to everything just by going to scottritterextra.com. Sunday at noon. Anything you want to say about that before we go to the question, Scott?
I think we've beaten this horse to death.
Okay. You're a little low on the volume. Maybe do that, the other audio check that we do in the settings to see if we can get the volume up a little bit. Okay. And while Scott's doing that, I'll show a couple of questions here. They're both about Nordstream, and I want to show two questions at once and have Scott answer them because he wrote a new article that was just published today about Seymour Hersh, who has a blockbuster article that's getting a lot of attention out that Scott calls Seymour Hersh's most important work ever. And that is really saying something because this guy is, as you say, a legend. And while Scott's getting his audio set, I'll show two questions. One is from Janet in Oakland. Seymour Hersh published his groundbreaking article the day after Biden's State of the Union address, and Janet is wondering if there's any connection between Hersh's timing when he came out with that and the State of the Union address. And we have a second question from Horatio Nelson in Puerto Argentino. What's your impression of the world's reaction to Europe disregarding the recent discoveries or analysis of the U.S. attacks on the Nord Stream pipelines? How about Russia calling for a Security Council with some of the facts? So maybe you can address both those questions and your thoughts on Seymour Hersh's article.
Well, I just wrote a Substack for us on that very issue, and I call it the Seymour Hersh's Trinity of Truth. And first of all, to get to the first question about timing, I don't know. I mean, I've been good friends with Seymour Hersh for 25 years. On sometimes he would call me and bounce things off of me. On this one, I didn't get called at all. This is something that Cy kept close to the vest, and I don't know why he timed it the way he did. What I can say is what I said in the Substack piece. This is his most important piece ever. This is a Pulitzer Prize winner, multiple Polk Award winner. This is the guy who exposed Abu Ghraib. He exposed Ivy Bells. He exposed everything. Without this article, he was still the greatest of all time when it comes to investigative journalism. And this article, written at this stage in his life, is the most important piece he's ever written because of the potential geopolitical ramifications of this story. This is about a president who committed acts of violations of the Constitution that are worthy of impeachment. We've had a lot of impeachment hearings in the last couple of years that were, frankly speaking, a political show. This is a president conspiring with his cabinet to bypass the constitutionally mandated, not suggested, not, oh, you might want to do this, mandated. You must do this, Mr. President. It's what the Constitution says. You have to report to Congress on this. And he didn't. He conspired to go around it. This is the kind of stuff that you kick people out of office for and you put them in jail. And Joe Biden is a criminal. I think people need to reflect on that. We have a criminal in the White House. He hasn't been convicted yet, and certainly he deserves due process. But let there be no doubt. If what Cy reports is true, and I have every reason to believe it because this is Cy Hersh, we have a criminal in the White House. And I think, the silence of Congress is deafening on this. Donald Trump made a phone call to Zelensky, and suddenly the world comes to an end. Joe Biden conspires to bypass mandated congressional notifications to commit an economic Pearl Harbor on an ally. We attacked an ally, a NATO ally. We attacked a friend we claim to be friends. We attacked a nation that we have military bases in. I graduated from high school in Germany, and we just attacked Germany, literally attacked it. There's no other way to get around this. We launched an attack on Germany. And the president didn't tell Congress about this. So, yeah, he should be out, but nothing's happening.
Some of your neighbors from when you lived there may be suffering the effects, right? They may be shivering or paying way too much for their gas.
No doubt, but there's also the issue of sovereignty. I mean, can you really call yourself a German now? I mean, what are you? You're not a sovereign nation. If you're going to sit there and let somebody attack you like this, I mean, there's words that can be used to describe this kind of relationship, and they're not good words. Things like cuckold. Germany is a cuckold nation, literally, because they allow the United States to come in and do what it wants to do and then walk away, and Germany's called to pretend it never happened. No, this is shameful for Germany. And what the reason why this is getting geopolitical attention is because, notice the silence in the American media. This is Seymour Hersh, who used to write for the New York Times. And I mean, when I say write for the New York Times, I'm talking about front page, above the cut, home runs every time he wrote for them. Knocked the ball out of the park. The whole country went crazy. Seymour Hersh. You used to write for the New Yorker, where when a New Yorker magazine came out with a Cy Hersh thing, it was a cover story and everybody was talking about it. When Cy Hersh published something in New Yorker, it dominated the news cycle. So this is Cy Hersh, and he wrote something now, and nobody's talking about it in the United States. No one. Why? Because the United States media, mainstream media, doesn't tell the truth anymore. That's not their job. Their job is to be the compliance stenographers of the U.S. government, and Cy Hersh is anything but a compliance stenographer. There's a reason why he's the greatest investigative journalist in the history of journalism, and that's because he finds the inconvenient truth, he captures it, and then logically and eloquently puts it out there in prose that makes it make sense, makes it readable, and could have an impact if people would pay attention. You know who's paying attention right now? The Germans. Seymour Hersh just gave an interview with a Berlin newspaper, and it's resonating. They're talking about it in Parliament now. And once these people they're not going to let this bone go. They're going to chew on it and gnaw on it. And they're going to bring it up. And sooner or later, the Germans are going to have to confront the fact that the United States attacked them. Not a little attack. This isn't about spying on Angela Merkel's cell phone, which we, of course, did because we're not the friends of Germany. They didn't learn their lesson back then. This is an economic Pearl Harbor. This is a surprise attack on a critical piece of energy infrastructure worth $12 billion, but worth far more than that when you calculate the cost differential between cheap Russian gas and now they have to buy expensive American liquid natural gas, where it's not $12 billion. We're getting close to $1 trillion over time. This is a massive attack, bigger than any, in terms of cost, bigger than any attack that ever occurred in the United States. What we did to Germany is going to cost them more than what the terrorists did to us on 9/11, what the Japanese did to us in Pearl Harbor. This is how big this is. This is a huge deal. And if the Germans wake up and start acting like a sovereign nation, this could be the end of NATO. Because how could Germany be part of a military relationship where the ally attacks them? So it's, and then if Germany
for masochists.
Well, they've been known for that.
Cuckolds and masochists.
Maybe that's what Germany wants to become. Basically a parody of 50 Shades of Grey. They can write a new novel about Germany, 50 Shades of Nazi Grey or something. I don't know. But then you have the relationship with the European Union, which is linked to NATO. if Germany withdraws from NATO, they're withdrawing from the European Union, which means they're going to drop the euro, which means the euro collapses. The Germans are going to go back to the Deutschmark, which will be the strongest currency in Europe because literally the German banks make the euro work, not the French banks, not the Italian banks, the German banks. And if Germany says, we quit, we don't want to be part of this game anymore because you guys stabbed us in the back, that's the end of Germany. So the geopolitical potential here is real. That's why I'm saying this is the most important piece he wrote. He wrote a lot of really good pieces that got a lot of resonance in the media in America, and there was some political fallout. But this can change the world. This article can change the world we live in. Now, I'm not saying change it for the better. I'm saying change it, and that's why it's the most important piece he's written. The other thing it did is, whether Cy knew it or not, and I have a feeling that he didn't know it when he wrote it, but he knows it now because we talked, and he agrees with me that this proves the Russian case. This article proves Russia's case for war, and I don't think the Biden administration understood that when they did it. But the fact of the matter,
in your article,
pardon,
you made that point in your article.
That's my third. That's the third aspect of the Trinity. The first is the president needs to be impeached. The second is Germany's going to change the world, and the third is Cy Hersh made Joe Biden made the Russian case for war by proving that this wasn't an unprovoked act of aggression by Russia. This was part and parcel of a larger American strategy, which was designed to create a confrontation in Ukraine for the purpose of severing gas. And people say, well, how do you make that connection? Well, I don't know. Today, we're talking about negotiated peace. There has to be a negotiated peace between the Russians and the Ukrainians. Well, the Russians had a negotiated peace deal on the table, ready to be signed on 1 April. So if we were looking for a negotiated peace, we would have allowed that to happen, but we couldn't. Why? Because the president said, if Russia sends in tanks, we have to blow up Nordstream 2, which has always been our objective, to sever Russian gas from Germany. That's been a strategic objective for decades. And so the president has committed to this. Russia invades Ukraine. Peace is about to break out. Can't let peace break out, because once peace breaks out, we can't blow up the pipeline. Had to sabotage peace so we could get the pieces in place to blow up the pipeline. Now that we've blown up the pipeline, we're now asking for a negotiated settlement, which isn't going to happen. But when you look at this new timeline, it's the United States is the aggressor, 100%. We're the ones who created this conflict. We're the ones who sustained this conflict. And this conflict is bigger than simply Russia and Ukraine. This is about the United States imposing economic hegemony over Europe, over Germany. The destruction of the natural gas was designed to weaken Europe by weaning them off of the cheap Russian gas that actually made their economy function. Think about it. Why does Europe have a quasi-socialist state? Why do the French and the Germans have these great vacations? Why do they have great standards of living? Because they have a nice tax base where they have workers who are engaged in industry making good salaries. What makes all this possible? Low energy costs. And what makes low energy costs possible? Cheap Russian gas. And when you parlay the cost savings that Germany and Europe has by acquiring cheap Russian gas below market price, it goes into trillions of dollars that now can be used to raise the standard of living. Now that they have to buy expensive American gas, they are literally, in a year, you see the difference. You see businesses shutting down. You see society starting to crumble. This is the reality of Europe. The thing that made Europe work was cheap Russian gas, and that's not what the United States wanted. So we cut off the gas. Now Germany and Europe is addicted to our expensive gas. We prosper, they don't prosper. Victory, United States.
I think it's worth mentioning also that Seymour Hersh is now 85 years old. So when you talk about this being his most important work ever, that's really quite a testament. I mean, it's enough that he's still active at this age, but for him to produce his best work at age 85 is remarkable. And I heard one of these interviews he did, and he doesn't come across as an 85-year-old at all. He doesn't look it. He doesn't sound it. He has not let the old man in at all.
No, I play golf with Cy Hersh, and I'm telling you, that ain't an 85-year-old man out on the golf course. That's a teenager in there raging. I mean, this guy has attitude like you wouldn't believe. He's young, apparently on the tennis court. I don't play tennis, but he's a terror on the tennis court. People are afraid to play with him and he's sitting there telling me he's 85 years old, and I'm not 85. And I'm sitting there going, oh, my knee, oh, this, oh, I hurt, oh, this. And so I was like, yeah, I hurt, but then I went out and I did this, and, I got stronger, and now I'm banging it over the net and banging it over the net. I put 10 yards on my drive. I said, how can you put 10 yards on your drive when you're 85 years old? I'm 20 some odd years younger than you, and I'm losing 10 yards a month. This guy is awesome. This guy is great. And because he's that way, he's going to live forever. And thank God, his brain is sharp as a tack. I think that it's not a criticism aside, because I love the guy to death, but his brain is so damn fast that he is sitting there thinking 26 thoughts at once, but his mouth can only say 4 thoughts. And so he's talking and he's going down this, and then his brain takes over, and then he has to jump over here. Then his brain takes over, he jumps over here, and you're just sitting there going, Cy, I don't understand what you're saying because you're all over the place. But just the thing I learned about him is just wait, because eventually his brain catches up and he links everything together. And in the end, you got the big picture, but you got to be patient with him because he's so smart. He thinks so fast. He talks so fast. If you, at first blush, you're just going, don't get it. But if you just wait and listen to him, the genius comes out. And then the beauty of it is he's a writer, not a speaker. And when he writes, it's there. The product is there. It's just outstanding.
Well, as you were talking, I was recalling that you and Seymour Hersh appeared together years ago at the New York Ethical Society in an event that was on C-SPAN.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to, maybe we should take a look at that now. If I can find it.
He's been an awesome friend. I mean, I couldn't have asked for a better friend than Cy Hersh. He stuck with me through thick and thin. He supported everything. If you look at my book, he's written just outstanding blurbs. He's just been, to have a friend like Cy is a treasure. And, so he's not just a national treasure, he's a personal treasure.
Let's take a look at that.
A lousy world we're leaving for our children and grandchildren.
I'll say this about nuclear weapons. I'm not sitting at the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I'm not in on the planning. I'll take it at face value that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Joint Chiefs of Staff successfully eliminated nuclear weapons in the initial phase of an operation. But keep in mind this, that the Bush administration has built a new generation of nuclear weapons that we call usable nukes. And they have a nuclear posture now which permits the preemptive use of nuclear weapons in a non-nuclear environment if the commander-in-chief deems U.S. forces to be at significant risk. If we start bombing Iran, I'm telling you right now, it's not going to work. We're not going to achieve decapitation, regime change, all that. What will happen is the Iranians will respond, and we will feel the pain instantaneously, which will prompt the Bush administration to move to phase 2, which will have to be boots on the ground. And we will put boots on the ground. We will surge a number of divisions in, probably through Azerbaijan, down the Caspian Sea coast, in an effort to push the regime over. And when they don't push over, we now have 40,000 troops trapped. We have now reached the definition of significant numbers of U.S. troops in harm's way, and there is no reserve to pull them out. There's no more cavalry to come riding to the rescue. And at that point in time, my concern is that we will use nuclear weapons to break the backbone of Iranian resistance, and it may not work. But what it will do is this, it will unleash the nuclear genie. And so for all those Americans out there tonight who say, you know what, taking on Iran's a good thing. I just told you if we take on Iran, we're going to use nuclear weapons. And if we use nuclear weapons, the genie ain't going back in the bottle until an American city is taken out by an Islamic weapon in retaliation. So tell me, you want to go to war with Iran, pick your city. Pick your city. Tell me which one you want gone. Seattle, LA, Boston, New York, Miami. Pick one, because at least one's going. And that's something we should all think about before we march down this path of insanity that George Bush has us headed on.
Notice
Who's that angry young man? Who's that angry young man?
Yeah,
Damn,
I was going to say you've aged more than he has.
yeah, thank you.
Notice also the Great Ovation. That's when you were criticizing the Bush administration. But now some of our friends on the left side of the buffet are a little less than rapturous. And
I'm an equal opportunity piss you off kind of guy.
Yeah, right.
I'll piss off Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians, apparently. So
Yeah.
I'll get everybody angry.
And you're still worried about the nuclear genie. We're still on that precipice.
We're still on that one. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's get back to our questions. I thought it might be interesting to take a trip down memory lane there. Ricardo, the angel in Quebec, who helped us once again yesterday, and we thank you for that, Richie. His question is as follows. Moldovan President Sandu is talking about a supposed coup attempt by Russia. Zelensky gave her the intel. Seems to me like they want the Soviet ammo warehouse in Transnistria and will try to pin it on Russia. Is Poland really that reckless and brazen to risk obliteration to get Galicia back?
So a couple questions there. I think the coup that Sandu is talking about isn't really a coup. It's called domestic politics. A lot of people don't realize that prior to the Sandu presidency taking, I think she won in 2020. Prior to that, they had a pro-Russian president in there who's still very active politically. The prime minister that just resigned, and I think that's the coup she's talking about, that the Russians used to squeeze the energy on Moldova to create domestic unrest to empower the significant pro-Russian element in Ukraine or in Moldova. It compelled her to the prime minister to resign. That's not a coup. It's called politics. Did Zelensky give her the intel? I mean, what does Zelensky know? I mean, the man, he's not plugged into Russia. Russia's plugged into him, but he's not plugged into Russia. So what intel is he giving? Is he passing on intel that's coming from the British or the Americans? I don't know. There is some concern that the Moldovans and the Ukrainians may make a play on Transnistria to get the largest ammunition dump in the world. And this is sort of important to get when Ukraine is running out of ammunition. The Secretary General, Jan Stoltenberg, just gave a presentation where he pretty much said Ukraine has lost the war. Who else has been saying that for some time? Gonzo
Scotty?
No.
Could it be Scotty Boy?
It could be Scotty Boy. Scotty Boy might be saying that's because back in September, Scotty Boy did the calculations and said Ukraine's going to run out of ammunition. But no, that's okay. I'm just crazy. But now the realities come in. They recognize that they've done the math, and they also recognize that they simply can't produce enough ammunition to make up the shortfall. So this summer, Ukraine runs out of ammunition, and it's over. So that's the reality. So one concept is because it's over. When we say over, it means it's over. Lights out. The Zelensky government's gone. Maybe in an act of desperation, in order to survive, they may make them play on Transnistria to get a hold of the ammunition. There's a limited number of Russian troops there. Some people said 1,500. It's more than that. It's probably closer to 5,000. And then reserves, you can mobilize reserves there, probably get it up to around 10, 15,000. But it would be problematic. What it would do is force Russia to go to Plan C. Because right now they're getting ready to implement Plan A, which is called Swamp Ukraine. They're just going to come in and it's going to be over. Boom. Plan B is swamp didn't work. Maybe we have to do something to respond to a Polish incursion. Plan C is stop the press. Everybody go south, take Odessa, and go up and link with Transnistria because Ukraine and Moldova has done something very stupid. It's something that we need to worry about. We have a Moldovan president, Sandu, who is increasingly pro-West. She's very pro-West, but she's now talking about wanting to join NATO, violating the constitutional requirement in Moldova for neutrality. It's not that she has an option to do this. Constitutionally, she can't. But apparently, Joe Biden has made it clear that constitutions don't matter, that when you're the president, you can do anything you want. And apparently, that's what she's trying to do. Say hello to Maverick. Hello, Maverick. But Yeah, so I think I answered the question there. Oh, is Poland?
Boy didn't get in. We said he should get in. We want him to get in. It's important that he does get in, but it's above your pay grade.
Sorry, go ahead.
Wait, that's why they get the limos, and you don't. So,
Did you want to say something else?
the question about Poland, is Poland stupid enough to make a grab for Galicia? It was interesting. I did a podcast. I know, Jeff, you don't like me doing podcasts, but this one was with a Polish academic who. So I thought it was very important to speak to Poland on this, because this guy has a lot. I mean, was literally speaking to the Polish public, and the conversation we had, it basically is as such. Now Poland is a democracy. There is civilian leadership of the military. The military is composed of professional officers who aren't adventurous. They aren't suicidal. They will obey the instructions of their civilian leadership, but they'll also give the civilian leadership professional advice. And I personally believe there's not a Polish officer of significance who's telling the Polish civilian leadership, hey, it's a good idea to go into Western Ukraine. This is a good idea, because they know the reality. Poland has 165,000 troops. Many of them are conscripts. None of them are well-trained. None of them are ready to go into this kind of war. We just had the commander of U.S. Forces Europe and the Supreme Allied Commander, General Cavoli, American general, who spoke in Sweden last month, and he said something fascinating. He said, what I've always been saying, people go, you're crazy, Scott, you're a propagandist, you're this. No, I just know what I'm talking about. And what's happening now is you can no longer lie your way out of this. So now generals have to start telling the truth. And what he told the Swedish audience is what's happening between Russia and Ukraine, the war that's happening there, is of a scope and scale beyond our imagination. We in NATO never imagined war like this. We're not ready for war like this. We haven't trained for war like this. We're not equipped for war like this. And he highlighted the other thing I've been saying, ammunition. He said, they use ammunition on a scale that we can't even begin to comprehend, artillery ammunition. So we can't go to war against them. We're not ready to go to war. And that's the supreme NATO commander, and he's talking about all of NATO. And when you rank all of the NATO militaries, let me tell you where Poland doesn't rank, at the top. Poland isn't at the top. Poland's somewhere in the middle, which means as bad as NATO is, Poland is even worse. And the Polish officers know this, so they are not going to encourage the Polish army, all 165,000. Wait a minute, they talk about increasing it to 300,000. But as they're trying to increase it to 300,000, they lost 10% of their military who just quit and said, nope, we're done. We don't want to have anything to do with this stupidity. So instead of getting patriotic Poles running to join this new legion that they're building, the professionals are saying out. Because why? They know they can't do it. NATO can't fight that fight. I've made this point over and over again. If the Ukrainian army today had a ceasefire with the Russians, pulled their forces back, pivoted them to the west, and marched, they could march all the way to Berlin and nothing could stop them, because they are far better than anything NATO has, with the exception of the United States. But the United States has some sustainability problems, number one of which we forward deployed our troops into Poland. So if Poland decided, it would be on the front line, the Ukrainians will come in, slice through. The Ukrainians are good. They are very, very good. And they're getting slaughtered by the Russians right now. The death toll is unbelievable. They're not winning. The Russians are beating them tactically, operationally, and strategically. That's a contradiction to General Mark Miley, who came out and made a speech. The Russians are losing strategically. Really, Mark? How do you figure that one out? Because strategic is more than just military stuff. We have to bring in the economy. We have to bring in politics. And it seems to me that the Russian economy didn't contract 25% because of economic sanctions. It contracted about 0.2%. And next year it's going to grow, actually. An economy that's under the most stringent economic sanctions in the history of the world, where they've targeted the energy sector to retard Russia's ability to generate income. That economy is going to grow next year. And it's also an economy at war, where Russia has to turn on their defense industry, which is never a cost-saving mechanism. It's very expensive. Despite that fact, their economy is going to grow. And here's the kicker. They're going to run a budget surplus. Despite everything I just said, Russia's going to run a $38 billion budget surplus. You know, when America goes to war, it is deficit spending. It's always been that way. Let's go to war, baby. Deficit spending. Hell, that's all we know how to do is deficit spending anymore. But my point is, Russia's at war. Their defense industry is kicking in. They've been strangled economically. Their primary mechanism of earning money has been attacked, and their economy is growing, and they have a budget surplus. So, Mark Miley, I think you're off on the strategy. The other thing, too, is it's about political. Sergei Lavrov just traveled around the world, and the United States is sort of hounding him, bird dogging him, because they don't like it when the Russians are well received. If Russia was losing strategically, would Sergei Lavrov be well received around the world? Why is it the world isn't buying into American-led sanctions? Why is it that South Africa is saying no? Why is it that Africa is saying no? Why is it that everybody's saying no? Because Russia's winning strategically. Russia is winning the hearts and minds battle of the world. BRICS, Brazil, they're not sanctioning Russia. It's not going to sanction itself. India, no, they're not playing that game. China, nope, they're not either. South Africa, no, nobody. And BRICS is expanding. Meanwhile, the G7, the 7 most successful economies in the West, the most powerful economies in the world, used to be. Britain, no, they're in the dumps. Germany, no, I already told you, they're not doing well. France, no, not either. Italy, Canada, no, the only one doing well is America. That's it. Everybody else is having a hard time. So as the G7 starts to shrink in terms of influence, BRICS is expanding bigger. Strategic, Mark Milley, you don't even know what strategic means. I bet you can't spell it because you're in the Army. You got to talk to a Marine about spelling. I'm being facetious here. But, and then operationally and tactically, now we're getting into military stuff. Now we're talking about boots on the ground, moving around, hook and jab and all that stuff. Hey, Mark, Bubba, artillery ammunition. Yeah, that's all I have to say, Mark. Artillery ammunition. Is the side that runs out of ammunition winning operationally and tactically? I have a funny feeling, Mark, if you're in an artillery fight at the tactical level and the other side already outguns you 10-1 and you run out of ammunition and they don't, I bet you get beat tactically. And that's what's happening right now, Mark. And then we can expand it to the operational level where we just make the battlefield even bigger. And you're going to run out of artillery ammunition. They aren't. You've lost operationally. So, Mark, we're losing strategically. We're losing operationally. We're losing tactically. Russia's winning on all fronts. And that's the God's honest truth.
All right. On a technical note, Scott, may I ask where your microphone is?
I took it off. I'm talking on the old school microphone.
I hear noise. Okay.
No, I'm speaking to this one because the other one just wasn't working. It wasn't going to work. So we have to fix it somehow.
Okay.
If you want me in break to plug it back in and try it, I can try it. But you told me that it wasn't working here, and I don't know. I'd rather than me fumble around. I just went old school tonight.
Okay. I don't know.
I know you're disappointed in me. I know you're disappointed in me. Your face says disappointment.
I don't remember saying it wasn't working. Alex from Western Mess. This whole idea of a new arms control movement / agreements might not be popular with Russians. Why do you think 1 million Russians would go on the streets to demand what could be seen, from a Russian point of view, as some kind of another Minsk agreement scheme to buy time for U.S. and NATO to catch up with Russia, the nation they still would certainly want to destroy?
It's a good question, Alex, but it's the wrong question because that's not what I'm talking about. You see, I'm somebody that believes that arms control should be left to the specialists. Alex, if you think Russia doesn't want arms control, pick up the phone and call Anatoly Antonov. He's the Russian ambassador to the United States. He negotiated the last START treaty. He wants arms control. All right, so don't tell me the Russians don't want arms control. They want arms control. What they don't want is the arms control the way the United States has been pursuing it recently, where if it's a fair deal, we rip it up. We negotiate to our advantage. We lie, we cheat, etc. Russia does not want that kind of arms control. But real experts know that if you get rid of all arms control, we're into an arms race. And there is no one who wins the arms race. The devil wins the arms race, because we are going to basically have all of humanity go to hell. And the Russians know this. So don't tell me what the Russians want and what they don't want. Okay, I know that the Russian leadership is in favor of genuine arms control because they have said so. I agree they don't want to play the game where America uses arms control for their unilateral advantage. The world is going to change when Russia wins this war, and they're going to win this war. You see, arms control is about attitude as much as it's about technology. And arms control, if you respect your opponent, you get good arms control. The INF Treaty. Why did we get the INF Treaty? With pure reciprocity? Because we feared the Soviet Union. We respected them. So when we sat down to negotiate, we wanted an honest-to-God treaty that helped resolve the security problems between the two nations. Later on, when the Soviet Union collapsed, we stopped fearing Russia. So we started using...
I'm here.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if that was feedback from my microphone.
What? Oh, sorry. Did you hear noise on my end? Sorry about that.
I did. So I thought maybe my microphone was I thought I was getting a little Jimi Hendrix effect, but
no, I was just putting my air conditioner on. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. The treaties that came afterwards, especially this most current version of START, the new START treaty, is not a good arms control treaty for Russia. They thought it was when Ambassador Antonov negotiated. He thought it was, but what he found out is that the United States has redefined terminology. The United States had loopholes where they changed the definition of the word after the fact and started doing things that the Russians said you can't do, but the United States said the treaty doesn't say we can't do it. And the Russians are going, well, that's not good faith negotiation. They don't want that. I agree. But what we have to do is get the United States back to the table. I'm not trying to sit here and tell anybody what the treaty should be. Not my business. That's the business of Russian negotiators and American negotiators to come up with a treaty. I'm not trying to dictate a solution. I am trying to impose a process. You see, we have to talk to the Russians, and they have to talk to us. Right now, our elite doesn't believe they have to talk, and the American public isn't insisting on it. Failure to talk means it's the end of the world for everybody sitting here. If you don't think so, I'm sorry, then we have nothing to talk about. My job is to scare you, is to make you believe that the world is going to end, because the world will end if we don't have arms control. And right now, the way our politicians are postured, we're not going to have arms control. So the world's going to end. So the question is, do we just sit here and continue to live our lives as if nothing's happening, whistling Dixie, or are we going to do something about it? Are we going to take action to prevent the end of the world? I'm opting to take action. And, I'm trying to get 1 million Americans to replicate what happened in June of 1982. By the way, that gathering of people there basically broke free the rust that was on the arms control negotiations that were taking place at the time. Nobody was talking in 1982. Remind you of something? Right here. Nobody's talking. Putting 1 million people in there sent a political signal to Ronald Reagan, the man who called the Soviets the evil empire, didn't believe in all this stuff. And he woke up and helped wake him up to saying, we must have arms control. 5 years later, we got the INF Treaty. I'd like to see that happen again. And so that's what we're pushing for. Now, when you say get 1 million Russians in the street, I'm not asking the Russians to go in the street and demonstrate. What I'm asking the Russian people to do is tell the American people we're in solidarity with you. I'm not asking the Russian people to send a signal to the Russian government, because the Russian government doesn't need to have a signal sent to it. The Russian government is ready for responsible arms control. The Russian government's ready to sit down right now. Nobody needs to demonstrate to tell the Russian government to do anything. The idea is for the Russian people to stand up to the Americans and say, we're with you. We support you who are in the streets asking your government to sit at the table with our government. That's all we're asking for. We're not predicting outcomes. We're not trying to dictate outcomes. That's what the governments do. I just want these guys to sit down together, and the Russians will not be arrested if they go to the streets. This is an absurdity in the extreme. I'm just telling you right now, because they're not demonstrating against anybody. They are out there doing something in solidarity with the United States. And, at least that's the approach I'm taking. I believe that if we can get Russians and Americans to talk people to people, that, Russian expression of solidarity can be empowering for the United States, especially when we live in a nation that is held prisoner to Russophobia. Ask the average American what a Russian is like, and they don't know. They don't know. They don't have a clue. And so one of this process isn't just putting 1 million people in New York City. Part of this process is getting some of those million people to begin to communicate with Russians and getting Russians to communicate back with them, people to people, not government to government, people to people. So they learn about how joint humanity. Maybe they put their kids on the phone. The kids start to talk. Imagine that, teaching children not to fear Russians, but rather to like Russians, teaching them Russian children not to fear Americans, but to like them. I mean, this is what I'm trying to do. So don't tell me that people aren't going to go on the street. I reject that. Absolutely. I reject the premise, because that tells me people don't believe in humanity. People don't believe in the potential of love conquers all. And if that's the life you want to lead, then go back to the article I wrote about my backpack. Get the hell out of my backpack. I ain't going to carry you. Get out of my way. Go sit in your basement. Go pick flowers in the field. Do something, but don't be near me, because I'm on a journey. I'm headed in that direction. And if you don't want to be with me, get out of my backpack. I'm not going to carry you. Get the hell out of my way. I don't mean to be too blunt here, but we don't have time for this nonsense. If you don't want to go in the street, don't go in the street. That's your option. I'm not compelling anybody to do anything, but I think it's a compelling message that if we get together and we work together, we can send a signal that Americans should sit down with Russians to discuss the fate of the world.
One of my favorite, I have a favorite saying that I usually apply to business relationships or personal relationships, but I think it applies to geopolitics as well. And I think it's pretty much the same sentiment you're expressing. And the saying is this: there are no misunderstandings. There is only the failure to communicate.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how can you argue with that? Just communicate. And Scott addresses this in more detail in his speech that you can hear Sunday at noon. Go to scottritterextra.com for links to that. And let us move on to our next question. Nicholas Sweden: has Russia fought the war as it has to deplete Ukrainian and the West stocks of ammunition? Ukraine received about a third of all the armaments and ammunition of the Soviet Union after its collapse. An attrition to deplete stocks and supply before a bigger offensive seems like a good strategy, but I'm no expert.
I mean, what you're saying, Nicholas, is logical, very logical. And I'd like to believe that the Russians have the intelligence on, the Ukrainian supplies. I'd like to believe that the Russians knew in advance what Western artillery production rates were, and they were able to do the simple math of they have this much already produced. They produce it at this rate. If we get the Ukrainians to expend it at this rate plus, they will run out of ammunition and we win the war. That's the kind of analysis that I would have done had I been in a conflict asked to make assessments about the strategic capability of my opponent to sustain a fight. It's the kind of analysis we did about the Iraqi military, about ammunition stockpiles, etc. So I'd like to believe that the Russians have done that, but I don't know. I don't know what's behind their strategy. Because they aren't talking. That's sort of the interesting thing about this in this day and age of information warfare. I find it hilarious that Jens Stoltenberg is out there admitting that NATO's lost the war, and the Russians are just like, duh, and then they don't say anything. Everybody's like, well, what are the Russians up to? They don't need to tell us. They have no desire to tell us. They're not playing the information war game. They're not playing shape perception game. They're playing, we're going to win this war. And that's what they're doing. So logically, your question makes absolute sense. And if I were a betting man, I'd put some money on that. I wouldn't put all my money on that, but I'd put some money on that because that makes sense. But I'd hedge because I've been wrong about this war before. I've made assumptions based upon limited data. At the beginning of the war, I assumed they were going to come in doctrinally. I believe they were going to swamp the Ukrainians then. Had they come in doctrinally, they would have swamped it. I had no idea that Russia was going to do a special military operation. Who out there did besides the Russians? Can anybody out here honestly say, hey, I knew they were going in soft. I knew that the Russians weren't trying to win a war, that the Russians were actually trying to shape the situation to get a negotiated settlement early on. I knew that the Russians weren't serious about demilitarization, denazification, that was just a ploy to look strong to get the Ukrainians to the negotiating table. No one here could say they knew that. We're all learning. Good analysts sit there and go, got it wrong. Why? What did I get wrong? What assumptions did I make? What happened, what I wasn't aware of? Then you reverse engineer it, you reprogram, you recalibrate, and you come up with new assessments. And I think I recalibrated pretty damn quick. Remember, Jeff? Game changer.
Oh, I remember the famous game changer conversation.
The switcheroo, the old switcheroo. Scott Ritter's an idiot because he's switcherooed. No, it's just called being a good analyst who looked at the data, recalibrated, came up with an assessment, and home run, baby. Got it right. And I've been getting it right ever since. That doesn't mean I can't get it wrong in the future, because who the hell knows what the Russians are up to? They certainly aren't calling me saying, hey, Scott, give us a quick tip on what we should do next week. I don't know. And if I knew, I wouldn't tell you, because that would make me a party to the conflict. I am an analyst that is sitting back observing this thing. A lot of people are like, you're pro-Russian. Well, I am pro-Russian. I mean, I like Russia. I like the Russian people. I like Russian history. And I think Russia's on the right side of history here. But I am not somebody out there trying to sell the Russian point of view. That sells itself. I'm just an analyst who takes the facts and puts them on the table. The fact that the facts, should I say that? I did say it, so we're going to use that. The fact that the facts align themselves to a conclusion that happens to be sympathetic to the Russian position is just because maybe the Russians are right. Has anybody ever thought about that? That it's not Russian propaganda to say things that make the Russians look good. Maybe the Russians are good on this one. Maybe they're doing the right thing. Maybe history's on their side. Gosh, I was called in the lead up to the Iraq War. I was an apologist for Saddam. I was a stooge of Saddam. I was a shill of Saddam. Everything. Why? Because they had to say that, because they didn't want to address the fact that what I was saying was right. I wasn't a stooge for Saddam. I was just telling the truth.
Right. You sound like me when people say, oh, you just won't admit you're wrong. And I said, well, let me know when I actually am wrong, and that might be a time to point it out.
I mean, I have been wrong.
Yeah, so, I know. You admit it. You admit it.
Gonzalo Lira has told me I've been wrong, and he's the best.
Recently, a gentleman from Switzerland named Filippo called with a voicemail question for you, and he's back again now. Let's check in with Filippo.
Hi, Scott and Jeff. This is again Filippo, and that's the second part. My question of today is related to the economic sanctions. Most commentators believe that the financial sanctions against Russia have the major goal to damage Russia and maybe ultimately to collapse the country and push for a regime change. Of course, that would be a desirable outcome for the United States. However, I believe that to damage Russia is not the primary objective of the sanctions. Don't you believe that the major objective of the sanction is to break the relationship between Europe and Germany with Russia? I think this argument perfectly fits also with what happened with the Nordstream, as it has been highlighted by Mr. Hersh in his article.
I detect a hint of Lugano there. I'm not certain, but
yeah, well, he said that the last time. So.
Oh, come on! I'm trying to show people how clever I am and smart I am. Look, let me put it this way. Early on in this conflict, I think there was an analyst named Michael Hudson. I could have that name wrong, but he was making that very argument, and I was dismissive, just straight out. Nope. This is all about Russia, and I could back it up by saying I could take my logic back to the collapse of the Soviet Union and consistency, and it's never been about collapsing Germany. When we talk about severing the gas line between Russia and Germany, it's about hurting Russia, not hurting Germany. Nordstream, and all of a sudden I'm like, whoa, Why did they do that? That makes no sense whatsoever. And if I do not have an economics degree, I'm literally, if you take dirt is smarter than me when it comes to economics. I am literally dumber than dirt on economics. So when I look at all of this, I predicted exactly what's going to happen. I said, there's just no way in hell. Actually, I'm not that stupid. I work for an energy intelligence group, and I specialize in energy security, and I'm pretty smart about how things work. And I looked at Russian energy and how Russia interacts with the world, and I went, Russia's going to ride this thing out. And what's going to happen is Russia will be able to outlast the sanctions because Europe is so addicted to Russian energy that any effort to sever the two is going to collapse the European economy before the Russians feel. In fact, the Russians may be able to pivot out of this and expand. I actually wrote all this stuff, and I was right, 100% right. If I'm smart enough to figure that out, you know damn well there's people in the CIA who know that too. These are economic specialists. They know that. And so the question is, why did we sanction then? Why did we enter this path that was designed to destroy Europe? And the only reason why I didn't buy into Michael Hudson's theory is because there has to be European economists who know that as well. And why would the European economists allow their governments to go into sanctions that are going to destroy them and there's no way out? That's the weird thing about this. The United States has a path out, and we've shown that path. As we wean them off of cheap Russian gas, we bring in the expensive American gas, and we make a lot of money. Meanwhile, Europe is just screwed. And the Europeans know that, so why would they do this? And then Nordstream comes. And we come up with that word that I don't like to say, but I'll say it anyway, cuckold. It's not just that Germany is a cuckold nation, Europe is a cuckold continent. And now Michael Hudson's theories make sense because the United States is about weakening Europe. This is deliberate. This is absolute economic warfare against Europe to weaken them, to suppress a European economic engine that was starting to gain traction and therefore become a competitor to the United States on the global stage. We can't have Europe being a competitor. We already have a problem with the Chinese competitor. So we need to bring Europe down a notch. And we do it by using all the tools available to us with the rules-based international order to keep what is in effect an American colony. And that's what this whole war has pretty much proven, that Europe is literally a colony of the United States. They function as a colony. And you take a look at imperial relationships. Their job is to produce things for the consumer, us, the masters, in a way that makes us succeed and they don't ever succeed. Do you want to know why the United States revolted against Great Britain? It wasn't just about British troops and homes and the Tea Party and all that stuff. It's because we refused to allow ourselves to be used in that fashion. We wanted to be wealthy too. We were the colonialists over here saying, why should we pay taxes without representation? Why should we have an economic relationship that's one way? Why can't, instead of making stuff, sending to England to be produced in England, why can't we make it and produce it here? Well, see, when you do that, you disrupt the English production, and they don't like that. Hence the revolution. I mean, it's more complicated than that, of course. I'm not pretending that there weren't a whole bunch of other issues involved, but I'm trying to tell you that a lot of it was economic, and a lot of it was a rejection by the colonies of their colonial status with the crown. Europe has that same status with the United States. And so this is early on in the rebirthing of Scott Ritter's thinking about this issue, but I'm no longer rejecting at face value that argument because there's some logic there. I still haven't put all the pieces together because I still don't understand how Europe can allow this to happen themselves. I mean, simply throwing out cute terms like cuckold, hey, sounds cute, yeah, but it doesn't answer the questions. These are some fundamental questions because the Europeans aren't stupid. They know this is happening. So what is it that made the Europeans buy into this strategy? Is there a secret deal? Is there something going? So I don't have all the pieces yet, so I can't come out.
That's what I was wondering when you were, paying praise that he deserves to Cy Hersh. Didn't they know it already? And again, I don't want to take anything away from his investigation, but didn't they know it already?
Know what?
Know who blew up the Nordstream pipeline.
Yeah, but there's a difference between. See, he comes at it with specificity, with details that make it so that you can't ignore it. It's one thing to strongly suspect the United States did it. It's another thing to know with absolute certainty that the United States did it. And Hersh has provided details, which, see, a lot of politicians will say, well, what can we do? We don't have any details. We think America did it, but we don't have any evidence. We don't have any of this, that, and the other. The way Cy wrote this article is you now have a lot of details, and you can't ignore it. You can't pretend it didn't happen. And so you now have to confront it. And now you have German politicians who are standing up in the Bundestag actually giving speeches calling Olaf Scholz to task. It's amazing what's happening. And if they gain traction, it could be the end of Germany.
And I see right now Seymour Hersh is trending on Twitter, probably due at least in part to you calling attention to the article. So hopefully that will
Well, I'd like to take credit for that, but I think Seymour Hersh is trending because he's Seymour Hersh. I mean, this is like he don't need, there's my good English. This is why I was a Marine. If I spoke English well, they would have put me in the Air Force. But he doesn't need Scott Ritter. He doesn't need anybody. This is Cy Hersh we're talking about. This is the greatest of all time. And, I'd like to believe that maybe I helped with his numbers.
Well,
but
I said in part due to you calling attention to it. I mean, something has to cause somebody to read the article in the first place.
Okay, we'll take credit, Jeff.
All right.
I'm going to call him up and ask for a cut of his Substack.
AJ. Hey, yeah, right. We're Substack colleagues. AJ from Illinois.
Competitors. We are competitors. And
Friendly
he's swamping us, Jeff. I have to tell you, we're getting swamped, baby.
Friendly competitors. AJ from Illinois. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the objectives were described as demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. But now, with the amount of artillery ammo being used by Ukrainians and the amount of equipment being destroyed by Russians, it looks like it's NATO being demilitarized quietly without Russian officials talking loudly about this fact. Do you agree?
I agree with everything except without the Russian officials talking loudly about this fact, because the Russian officials are talking about this fact. They're straight up saying that they're grinding through NATO as well. And basically, Russia's pretty cocky right now, and that's always a risk. You don't like to see people get too cocky too early. But Russia's like, you want to bring in the tanks? Bring in the tanks. You want to give them airplanes? Bring in the airplane. We'll kill everything. Doesn't matter. Let's go. They're resigned to the fact that this is a war between Russia and NATO. It's not a war between Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine is just a proxy. Ukraine is a proxy army. It's a proxy of NATO. And they long ago stopped, consuming the significant amount of equipment that they inherited from the former Soviet Union or produced themselves in their own indigenous arms industry. They're now almost exclusively using NATO equipment, and it's just being destroyed in massive quantities. So, the Russians know what's going on, and they're straight up saying it, and they know the consequences too. I mean, the Russians aren't stupid. They know that NATO's a paper tiger. They just straight up know it. And they now know that NATO ran out of artillery ammunition, which means, again, if Russia was everything we claimed them to be, do people understand what I'm trying to tell you? That once they defeat the Ukrainian army, if they were that which we claimed them to be, there's nothing that can stop the Russians from going to Warsaw and on to Berlin. There's nothing that can stop them except nuclear weapons. NATO can't stop them. General Cavoli straight up said, we can't fight that fight. We don't know how to fight that fight. We're not prepared to fight that fight. We're not equipped. But Russia's not going to, because that's not what Russia is. Russia is literally what they say. Ray McGovern, old CIA guy, good friend of mine, has taught me a lot of things. And I'm not saying he taught me his conclusions. Ray and I often differ on conclusions. But I respect the guy. I respect his experience. And the one thing he said, because he was an old Soviet hand, and Anybody who was alive in the 80s, you got to remember, we used to do things like look at photographs of the Victory Day celebration and see where people were standing. And then you'd write big papers about, Ligachev was 3 inches to the left of Gorbachev, but last year he was 5 inches to the left. Does that mean that Ligachev is now more influential? Where is Yeltsin? And you'd write papers about the positioning and all this kind of stuff, posture, what the facial expression was and all that. And McGovern was like, yeah, that's cute. That's interesting, but that's not how you do it. What you do is you listen to them. Because the amazing thing about the Soviets and the Russians is they're pretty straight up. What they say is what they mean. And they don't play this political game here in the United States. What they say is what they mean. So when you listen to the Russians today, they're literally telling you what they're going to do. And what they're not going to do is march on Warsaw, is march on Riga, is to march on to Lenin, let's see, Riga, to Lenin, Kalin, yeah, begins with a K. They're not going to march on that either. They're not going to march on anything. They just want, literally, they didn't want to march on Ukraine. Don't people understand what happened in March, early March? February 24th, they invaded. By March 2nd, they were at the negotiating table. By March 6th, they had 3 rounds of negotiations. By April 1st, they're ready to sign a peace treaty to bring this whole thing to an end. That's not what a nation does when they're trying to conquer the world. They wanted a peace settlement. They had no choice but to turn to the military technical means because everybody rejected Minsk, and the United States and NATO refused to negotiate according to the treaties. So Russia had no choice. But when Russia went to the military option, they weren't trying to win. They just wanted peace. That's all they wanted from day one. We're the ones that have pushed them into the current state. How Russia got to where they are today is not because that's where Russia wanted to be. Russia's there because we pushed them there. And I just tell people, you should be thankful that Vladimir Putin is the president of Russia, because he's the only adult in the room right now. If he was half the assholes that we are, we could be in a lot of trouble, because we've given Russia a lot of justification to do some pretty nasty stuff to us. We're at war with Russia, literally. We're at war. We are active participants in this conflict, but Russia continues to behave in a constrained manner. One of the reasons why they're behaving in a constrained manner is they know they're going to win. So why do anything to alter this outcome? But that doesn't mean that they can't be pissed off about this. And if they were vengeful, like, of course, we in the West are, we'd be in a lot of trouble. But I don't think we have to worry about Russia being vengeful. Russia's going to win this war, and then Russia's going to go back to what they've always wanted: peaceful coexistence with the West, a new European security framework that respects Russia's legitimate national security interests, Russia's spheres of influence. That's all they want, literally all they want. They've never wanted anything more than that. And it's sort of what we claim we want. But if we really wanted it, why would we push NATO's borders up to Russia? I mean, that's a question that Vladimir Putin asked back in 2007 at the Munich Security Conference. If you're our friends, why do you keep pushing your troops up to our borders? That's not what friends do. So, no, Russia is going to, I think we're going to find that Russia will behave quite responsibly. It's just a tragedy they had to get to this, because the sacrificial lamb is the nation of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people, and a 1/3 of a million Ukrainian soldiers who are dead, another 1/3 of a million Ukrainian soldiers who are wounded, 35,000 to 40,000 Russian soldiers who are dead, 50,000 Russian soldiers who are wounded. Each one of those soldiers is attached to a family. We're talking about a mother, a father, grandparents in some cases, a wife, sons, daughters, uncles, aunts, sisters, brothers. They've all lost somebody. They've all lost somebody. And again, to make this number even resonate, 300,000 Ukrainian dead. The United States lost 300,000 men in total in World War II, fighting the Japanese and the Germans. In total. World war, total war. In 1 year, Ukraine has lost that many men, probably more. And this is a tragedy. This is a product of evil. And the evil doesn't come out of Moscow. The evil comes out of Brussels, NATO headquarters. The evil comes out of London, Boris Johnson. The evil comes out of Washington, D.C., Joe Biden. Before him, Donald Trump. Before him, Barack Obama. Any president that allowed this policy to get to where we are today is evil.
Walter from West Virginia with our next question. Walter says, in January, the Ukrainian YouTuber Denis Davidov reported the Ukrainian parliament had passed special measures to deal with desertion in the ranks, which he admitted was a problem. Do you know anything about the specifics of the measures or how serious a problem desertions are for the Ukrainian army?
Well, my understanding is that they were looking for a legal framework to, they needed, it's not just desertion, but it's a unique situation where basically a Ukrainian unit would be sent to the front line, but its commanders would abandon them. Imagine that. Commanders don't want to die. So they go to the front line and they suffer 60, 70% casualties. And they say, why are we still here? So they get up and they just left. And they didn't surrender. They didn't desert and go home. They just left and came to the rear and said, we're not doing this anymore because our commanders aren't there. And there wasn't a legal framework to deal with this. There wasn't, they couldn't arrest them. They didn't know what to charge them with. So these laws were being passed to define abandonment of duty, desertion, whatever you want to call it. And so that's what they did. There's something else they're doing though. And I don't know if this is linked to laws or if this is just a manifestation of the fact that Ukraine has surrendered itself to an odious ideology of Stepan Bandera and Nazism. But these nationalist units like Kraken Battalion, Typhoon and others are positioning themselves behind the lines, Ukrainian lines. And if these units decide to move away from the front line, they get machine gunned down. The Russians, you hear anecdotal stories of Russian soldiers talking about Ukrainians trying to surrender, getting machine gunned down by the Kraken units, or people going to the rear and getting machine gunned down. There's horrible videos, and I don't know if they're real or if they're staged. I don't know, but of them burying people alive or executing people. These are Ukrainians burying Ukrainian soldiers alive, Ukrainians executing soldiers. I don't know if these are videos that were staged just so they could be disseminated to put fear into people. If you want my honest opinion, they look like staged videos to me. I mean, I've evaluated. I'm just like, no, this is fake. This is
the first example you gave, you think that's real, where the commanders abandoned their.
Oh, we know that's real. We know that's.
You know about how much of that has happened? How much, roughly?
A lot of it has happened. I mean, it's a significant problem because what happens is when they leave those lines, then the Russians. People have to understand how slow this fighting is. It's slow for a reason, because this is just bloody fighting. And when you abandon the lines, you make the Russians can come now in and occupy that line. And then the Ukrainians have to go in and dig another defensive line and man it. So they want to keep they don't want the Russians advancing like that. So when these units abandon the position, what the Ukrainian forces are willing to do is put a battalion in place and let it die in place. And then they bring in another battalion to replace it. But they don't want people moving back. But these soldiers feel like they're abandoned, and nobody cares about them. They're just going to die anyways, and they don't want to die. So they withdraw before other troops can be brought forward, so the Russians are able to advance and occupy that trench line. It's a bad thing. This is why you see the Russians just inexorably moving forward. And a lot of it is because Ukrainian troops are just abandoning the position and retreating. So they needed to pass laws so that they could define that as a crime and hold the people accountable, because in the military, once you start punishing people, that is in itself a deterrence to repeated bad behavior. But if there's no consequence for quitting the line and moving back, then that's sort of the option that any rational person is going to take when confronted with a situation where you've been abandoned by your officers, you don't have ammunition, and the enemy's coming in, and you're all going to die. The smart man says, not today, I'm going that way.
Next question is from Konstantinos in Greece, and that is a Greek name if I ever heard one. Do you believe that the recent earthquakes will affect the outcome of the upcoming Turkish election, and will Erdogan manage to pull off a victory?
This is going to be a contested election no matter what. I mean, Erdogan has some economic problems, some real economic problems. And there is some concern about the way he's governing. Some people think that he's headed towards a quasi-dictatorship. He's tilted towards, Islamist style government that has many Turks who are secular in nature, a little uncomfortable. There's a lot of Turks that still have an affinity for the West, who have a dream of being members of the European community, the European Union. They're proud of being part of NATO. And so Erdogan has, he's been a very popular president, but this election, I think while people thought that he might win, he might pull it out, it wasn't a guarantee. Prior to the earthquake, Erdogan was doing his best to tilt things in his favor. I think it's widely popular. I mean, again, the Swedes, it's almost like Erdogan paid the Swedes to do this, although there was a rumor, to burn the Koran. Because suddenly you have people rising up, Islamist passion is rising up, and Sweden and Finland aren't going to be in NATO. That makes Turkey appear to be very relevant in global affairs. That's something people are proud of. Russia is talking about building an energy hub that, once it's constructed, turn Turkey into a regional energy powerhouse, which not only raises the prestige of the nation, but also starts bringing in that much needed income that can turn the economy around. So things were looking good for Erdogan. Now the earthquake has hit. And one of the things that comes out of this earthquake is that Turkish construction standards were not adhered to. I'm not saying that had they built these things the way they should have built these things, they wouldn't have collapsed. This was a big earthquake, and stuff just goes down sometimes. But what people are finding out is that the quality of the concrete that was in these buildings wasn't sufficient to withstand the vibrations. And that's why you see these entire structures come down, because the big, thick concrete foundations weren't vibration proof. There are standards that you can put in there that are resistant to vibrations, so they don't crumble, the tensile strength of the concrete, etc. But if you use insufficient resources, if you cheat on the quality of the resource, I'm just making it simple. Let's say it costs $1 per unit to build a foundation the proper way, and you're building 1 million units. And you cheat on the cost so that you can get it down to 80 cents per unit. You just saved an awful lot of money, and that's what corruption is. That money goes into people's pockets. They bribe the building inspectors who turn a blind eye to things, et cetera, et cetera. It's all fine and dandy. People are going to dinner, going on parties, vacations until the earthquake hits. Now everything comes to the ground. The death toll is horrific. And there could very well be political consequences to this. Now, whether or not, what tends to happen is, blame will be shuffled. They're going to find some. Look, we see this all the time. Let's bring up Cy Hersh. My Lai. My Lai massacre was from the top to the bottom. The most innocent person in all this was Lieutenant Calley, because he was just a moron in charge of a rifle company who was obeying an order he should never obeyed. But Calley's the guy that got put on trial, found guilty, etc. Everybody up the chain of command, they didn't get in any trouble because they pushed all the blame on the Calley. That's what happens. And let's say people start blaming Erdogan. I can guarantee you that all the fault's going to be put down. They're going to find the building inspector equivalent of Lieutenant Calley. They're going to find the mayor that did the bribe, and they're going to blame all the local people in order to mitigate the nationwide political damage. But it's a risky strategy, especially with this many dead. So I don't know what the answer is, except to say that it made the May elections a lot more interesting from the standpoint that you can't predict with certainty who's going to win this thing.
Yeah, it's hard not to think about it here in Southern California, where I live, which is a place where we have earthquakes. I've lived through a lot of minor earthquakes that were kind of fun in a way. People make jokes about it, but there was also one big earthquake that happened in 1994 that wasn't fun at all. One of the freeways here collapsed. And I remember very vividly when I was in my apartment, and it was really scary. And presumably, most of the buildings here, I guess, are built as securely as they can be. But who knows for sure?
Yeah, I don't want my wife and I were on a vacation once, and we were over the Pacific in the middle of nowhere, meaning there's no emergency divert runway. and the storm from hell was there all over. You couldn't go up, you couldn't go down. The pilot had no choice but to go through it. And these wings are literally flapping like this. I'm serious. The wings are doing this. And they're looking at going, we're going to die because ain't nothing designed to do this. And for about an hour and a half, that damn airplane flapped its wings through this storm. And fortunately, they stayed on. But my point is,
an hour and a half that was happening.
Oh, I'm not exaggerating. My significant other, Voldemort, will is nodding her head in agreement. This was literally one of the scariest moments in my entire life, and I was chuckling at the time because I'm just like, when's it going to happen? And then when it happens, how long will I be conscious before I black out? Will I be aware of what's happening? And for an hour and a half, I'm just basically planning my death in my head because we were going to die. But what I'm trying to say is, you can build things, you can design things, but there is a failure point for everything. I think that airplane had to be taken out of service when it landed because there's just no way. They had to inspect every rivet, every joint. Because, Jeff, I'm not exaggerating. This.
Yeah, I believe it.
It's crazy. Airbus. It was an Airbus. It was an Air France Airbus. And I guess the French were not drinking wine that day, and they built a damn good airplane, and we're very grateful for them.
Or maybe they were drinking wine and it helped.
And maybe that's why they built a good airplane. Yeah.
Roger Codger from Cleveland, Ohio. Your thoughts on the news that the U.S. is planning a war against China by or before the end of the decade?
I don't think the U.S. is planning a war against China. But here's now we're getting into a fine line here. We are preparing to fight China. There's no doubt about that. General Berger, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, has all but acknowledged that he is restructuring the Marine Corps so that he can get resources adequate to the task of waging amphibious operations against China in the South China Sea. That's become his mission. I mean, he's taking it serious. He got rid of tanks. He got rid of military police. Because he said, we're getting rid of all the legacy stuff that we don't need. And we're going to restructure, reimagine warfare so we can fight the Chinese in this new environment. But that's the way he explains that is that's what he's been tasked to do. If you read the National Security Strategy and the National Defense Strategy, it instructs the Marine Corps to be prepared to carry out specific operations in the South China Sea against the Chinese opponent and if you're the Commandant of the Marine Corps, it's not that you believe there's going to be a war. That's your job. Your job is to answer. And he said for years we have failed to meet our duty because we're married to legacy systems. And we're so, we're like, well, Marines always had this. Well, yeah, but do we need it today? I mean, there was a time when they had horse cavalry. We always had horse cavalry. Well, we don't need them anymore, so we got rid of horse cavalry. Now, Marines have tanks. Maybe we don't need them. Maybe tanks isn't what we need when we're fighting the Chinese in the South China Sea. The Air Force has been given certain requirements to do certain things. So, I think the Army too. Everybody has been told to prepare for the potential of a conflict. But U.S. policy, official policy, actually constrains us from doing this. Even though Joe Biden has said at least 4 times recently that we will come to the aid of Taiwan if attacked by China, we actually can't plan for that because that would be a violation of the one China policy and all the different contingencies that are attached to that. So I can't say that we're actively planning for a war. What I can say is that people are preparing for a war. And then we have some idiots like General Minahan, the commander of Air Mobility Command, an Air Force general, who just straight out writes a memorandum that says his gut feeling, I mean, not a professional intelligence assessment, it's my gut feeling that we're going to be at war with China come 2025. Okay, General, it's not your mandate. You don't get to make that assessment. It's the Defense Intelligence Agency's job. Your job is to put people on airplanes and flying from point A to point B. But then he turns around and he says, and I want all my people who are supposed to qualify on pistols, I want you to take a pistol and fire a clip. A clip. Really, General? A clip? It's called magazines. We don't call them clips. But clip into a target 7 meters and aim for the head. When's the last time you qualified, General? Because that's not how you qualify on a round. You don't empty a magazine into the head. But my point is, you have this kind of irresponsible rhetoric that makes people begin to think that maybe the United States is in fact planning for a war against China. But we every time we war game it in Newport, Rhode Island, where the Naval War College is, we lose. So maybe we're planning to win a war game against China. That would be different. But in fact, we do. We cheat. Because we can't win. What we do is we cheat on the war games. We do things like, well, today is, it's 2023, but we're going to give ourselves capabilities that won't be ready till 2026, but we're going to pretend that we have them today. And then we're going to dumb the Chinese down and we're make ourselves smart. All of our stuff works perfectly. None of the Chinese stuff works perfectly. And when we do that, we still barely win. So we cheat just enough in the game to get an outcome that says we could win. And then that's good enough for the politicians, because now they get to look themselves in the mirror and say, yeah, we can be tough against China because we have a military that could win. But the answer is we can't win. The war, if you think, again, we go back to General Cavoli's statement about not imagining what the war in Ukraine would be. How could you not imagine it? You're a military professional, but we couldn't imagine it, couldn't comprehend it. The scope and scale is beyond our ability to understand. Same thing applies to China. We have no clue how bad this is going to be, and we are not ready for this. We think our ships are going to actually be able to approach Taiwan. None of our ships will make it anywhere near Taiwan. They will be sunk several hundred kilometers short of Taiwan by Chinese missiles that are very accurate and cannot be shot down by anything we have. Our airplanes won't get anywhere close because of Chinese air defense, etc. The Chinese are going to swamp Taiwan with millions of men, hundreds of thousands of men coming in before we can even begin to mobilize. Our war plan for Korea involves us mobilizing between 400 and 900,000 personnel and then shipping them over to the Korean Peninsula. We have a war plan for that. We don't have a war plan for Taiwan because legally we're not allowed to have one. So we have no troops earmarked. It's not like you can say, let's take the Korean war plan and just shift it to Taiwan. The problem is all those forces are earmarked for Korea, where there's a real threat called North Korea up there. So if we suddenly say we're going to fight in Taiwan, that means we have nothing left for North Korea. We can't fight a war against Taiwan right now. I'm just telling you straight up, we can't do it. And any general that thinks we can should be institutionalized for being insane.
Thomas from Paris, France. What is the percentage of people on both sides of the conflict actually holding a gun? Is it higher or lower than other armies with numerous non-combatant crews?
The way wars are fought today, they take rear area security quite seriously. So your cooks, your bakers, your candlestick makers are going to be armed. They're not going to be armored. They're not going to have all the bells and whistles, but they will be armed. They'll have a pistol or they'll have an AK-47 with a limited supply of ammunition, so that if a reconnaissance group or a saboteur group or an insurgent group launches attack, they will be able to provide a modicum of self-defense. I think the real question to ask is what percentage of the people on the front lines are firing their weapons? That's, and I don't know the answer to that, but there was an interesting book written by an American author whose name escapes me right now. Title of the book was On Killing, and he just talked about how basically in World War II, the majority of American infantrymen never fired their weapon. I mean, so the unit would fight in, and the guy would be down there, and there's a handful of people who would actually get the courage to come up, aim, and fire the weapon. But the vast majority of people just sat there and they never fired their weapon. And then when they moved, they got up and they moved again, because it's hard to kill people. It's hard to train people to kill people. That's just the reality of it. It's tough. And I would be interested in knowing what percentage of Russian troops fire their weapons. And if they fire their weapons, what percentage of them fire them the way you're supposed to fire, which is aimed fire? How many of them just go pow, 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 to say I fired ammunition? And I'm not picking on the Russians. I'm talking about human psychology. I'm talking about, I am curious to know what have the Russians done to prepare their combat troops to actually fire their weapons against human beings in combat. We know that some do it, but generally what happens in combat of this nature is you get a few people who actually do the fighting and everybody else just sort of maneuvers along. And you see this when you look at the videotapes of the Russian assaults on trench lines. You see 3 to 5 guys go forward and they're doing the job. They're coming in, firing the weapons, throwing the grenades. And then behind them come about 20 guys who don't do anything. They just jump in the trench line and they sort of follow them. I'm not picking on them, but I'm just saying that, when you look at that video, if there's 30 people in that video, 5 are firing their weapons. No one else is. No one else is. And it's a psychology. It's the psychology of war and on killing. Anyways, I think I just basically went down a tangent.
The author of On Killing is Dave Grossman.
There it is, Dave Grossman. Yep.
The Psychological Cost of Learning to Kill in War and Society. That's the subtitle. Don from Bangkok, Thailand. And then after this, let's get some live questions coming in on YouTube and Facebook. I always like to make people aware that although we are streaming live on Twitter, Rumble, and Twitch, we can't insert those comments live, but we can do it for YouTube and Facebook. And Ann Moss, handling the backstage duties tonight, will be doing that shortly. So line up a couple of good ones for us, Ann, if you don't mind. Don from Bangkok, Thailand says, when you're interviewing Russian guests on the Scott Ritter Show, is your Russian sufficient to follow what they are seeing, or do you rely on the English translator?
Well, now. Да, моя русский язык очень хорошо. And Voldemort is telling me to shut up because I don't speak Russian. I don't understand Russian. I am the dumbest person on the planet. That's not true. I can literally understand some Russian and I can communicate in Russian, but I can't speak it. And there's no way I could have a conversation with any of these guests if we didn't have a translator. And now I'm going to get serious for a second. The people who support me on the Scott Ritter Show aren't paid. They're volunteers, and they do a damn good job. Now, there's some people out there who get critical of them. Why? Why would you dare get critical of these people? These people are putting the best effort in there. And sometimes we talk about subjects that, I have trouble following in English. We get technical. We get, we throw in, some different thought processes that aren't the norm. And so we take these people and they're doing simultaneous translation, which is sort of the hardest thing to do. So they're listening and they're doing it both ways. That's what people don't understand. The guy, because if you think I don't speak Russian, many of the people I'm speaking to don't speak English. So this translator has to sit there and listen to me speak and then speak Russian to them, and then turn around. They speak Russian. He has to speak English to me, and they're doing this for 40. I am told by the producer all the time, Scott, shorten the show. You're exhausting the translator, literally. Because I'm sitting there, I'm talking to some of these most fascinating people in the world, and I just want to keep listening to them and talking to them. And my phone's like, ding, ding, ding. I'm looking at it, it's like, shut it down, stop. The translator's exhausted. The translator's going to die. He's, you've worn him out, because it's hard work. It's very hard work.
Yeah,
and
it seems downright impossible, actually.
It's totally impossible. They do a very, very good job.
So what are the people complaining about? You said people are complaining about what?
Because sometimes, first of all, you get people like me who are just downright rude. And what I mean by that is I don't mean to be rude, but anybody who does professional translation would always prefer that the person that they're translating for speak in a slow, deliberate manner, well-paced, so that they can hear the words, etc. But if anybody who's listening to me, I get excited, and then I start going, well, then we're going up and down and all around the way, twisting, and the translator's like, holy cow! So they're jacking that up, and then the guy I'm talking to gets equally excited. He comes back to me, and then they're doing that, and now we're talking fast, and the translators is just literally what I was told on one show, particular show, that the translator was soaked in sweat when it was done. Soaked in sweat.
So is that what the audience is complaining about? The job?
They're complaining that the translator sometimes loses
up with-
pace.
Oh yeah.
And so we're saying things in the and what happens then is that the translator, rather than lose everything, will just skip and catch up, and they'll miss a chunk. And so they're
Yeah.
like, well, he missed a very important part. Well, that's probably because the idiot, me, was talking a mile a minute.
Yeah,
And
it's
had I
impossible.
slowed it down,
You know what else? I can't even understand how what do they call them in court? The transcriber, which is just one language.
Yeah.
When the lawyer and the witness are going back and forth, and the transcriber has to keep up. It just seems totally impossible to me.
yeah. Well, I mean, but they have I think they have one person who's sitting there, but then they have another person with this little cone, and they're like talking into it as well. So they're getting a backup. They're getting the cone, and then they're getting this, and who knows.
But now they can just record it, so I don't know why they.
But Kaylin, you're right. That's why they take turns. That's if you have two translators. But because this is the Scott Ritter show, we don't have a budget, so we get one translator who's a volunteer. So it is what it is. Look, today, just to give you an example, I interviewed a guy. I call him Nikolai, but it was Mykola, I think his name is Azarov. He was a former prime minister of Ukraine. He was the prime minister of Ukraine when Viktor Yanukovych was there. This is a high quality interpreter. You're right, Alexander. You're right. It's an interpreter, not a translator.
Look at that, all caps and 6.
Okay, they were mad at me. He's probably an interpreter. And so he's like, not a translator, an interpreter. But no, you're right. But
calm down, Alex. Just take.
But I had this historical figure. I mean, this is big deal. I'm talking to the former prime minister of Ukraine, who was there during the Maidan, moment. Wow.
Yeah, you're going to get excited. Of course, you're only human.
Well, yeah, but I mean, so the Scott Ritter show doesn't have a budget, but we sure get some interesting guests.
That's for damn sure. All right, so let's take some questions from the live audience. I mentioned Ann Moss is handling the backstage duties. Those of you who've been with us for a while probably know that Tori Mansfield has been doing it for several months, and just got too much for her because she now has a full-time job. But I just want to say thanks to Tori. I have no idea if she's watching or will ever hear this, but I do want to express my appreciation. We started with, like 5 viewers, and now we're up to at least 10. So Tori stuck with us for a while, and
Tori is legend. First of all, one, she not only helped us here, but when I went to Boston to speak, she came and she helped out there on her own time. But she will always be legend because of our last show. I think it's the funniest thing in the world when hey Tori baby, are you still with us? And then there's this pause, and then the voice from hell. Yeah, I'm still here. And at that point, that's the proof that we had exhausted this poor lady, that she was trying to work, but she's still trying to volunteer her time. And when we heard that, we laughed, but then we felt bad because we were, it shows people have to understand that, she does it because she wants to do it, but it's helping us tremendously, but you pay a price. So I thank you, Tori, for everything you did. Is she still doing the podcast with you, right?
Yeah, she's still doing Sundays. Yeah. Okay. So I would be really sad if she wasn't in my life anymore. But so at least we have her still there. And yeah, she's just a great person.
But again, the fact that we're praising Tori so much means that Ann, thank you. You're doing a hell of a job.
Oh, you're welcome.
You're definitely doing a great job. So let's get to the questions from the audience. Nikolay Tomov, can you explain dead hand system the Russia employs? Does the U.S. have similar systems? What about China and the rest of the nuclear powers like India, Israel, Pakistan, France, and the UK?
Okay, Nikolay, thank you for your BGN 10 donation. But that's a BGN 50 question. I'm joking.
BGN, is that?
I have no idea what BGN is. Belgian.
No, Belgium has an M.
That would be a euro, though. I mean, so there's no Belgian currency anymore. That would be the Belgian franc. Who knows what BGN is?
I'll look it up while you're answering the question.
But can I explain the dead hand system that Russia employs? The dead hand system is when the United States started deploying submarine launched ballistic missiles. Bulgarian. There we go. From Bulgaria. All right. When the United States started deploying the Polaris system with Poseidon, et cetera, I mean, submarines could come closer to the shore, and they fire their missiles on a flatter trajectory, so the time of flight is less. And the Russians were very concerned about the potential of a first strike. And if the fear was if the United States hit Moscow at the right time, then the briefcase that is used by Russian leadership wouldn't be able to get activated, and therefore the Russians would be sort of find their hands tied, and then we could take out their silos and they could lose this nuclear conflict. So the idea of the dead hand was to make it impossible to have a decapitation attack. So the dead hand or perimeter has several features to it. One, they have a big underground command center that has links to sensors all over the Soviet Union, or now Russia. These are seismic sensors, because when nuclear weapons go off, you tend to get a seismic shock. They have acoustic sensors that can hear things. They have heat sensors, and they have radiation sensors. And they're all out there. And the whole idea is that if we launched an attack, these sensors would detect this and say, oh, we've been attacked. Now, there's still a human being there in the command center. So now that human being can process this data, attempt to make communication with Moscow. If they can't make communication with Moscow, assume that Moscow has been terminated, and then they can launch these missiles that have been, the nuclear warhead has been taken off, and a communication package has been put on, and that missile will fly over the length of Russia, broadcasting the launch codes, and all of Russia's missiles will launch and go forward and kill people. So it's real. And, in my book, Perestroika in the time of, or Disarmament in the time of Perestroika, I talk about this because we had a missile crisis actually in March of 1990, where the Russians didn't want us to X-ray a certain kind of missile. And so they shipped the missiles and didn't let the X-ray system, the cargo sand system, scan them. And it turns out that these were, when the original missile that they used, it was a silo-based missile. I think it was the SS-17 silo. But the problem with the silo is that when the Trident missile came in, it was now faster, even more accurate. It was possible that the Trident missile could take out the dead hand. And so now the dead hand is dead. So in order to keep the dead hand alive, they put it on the SS-20, a mobile missile. And they had a regiment of SS-20, and it was called the Gorn, Gorn. And it had the package. But the SS-20 got destroyed by the INF Treaty. I mean, rapidly destroyed. And suddenly the Soviets are going, well, we don't have a replacement for the Gorn. So what they did is they came up with something called the Syrena. The Syrena is an SS-25 that has the package on it. But you had to actually produce those missiles. And the SS-25 is produced at Vodkinsk. And so I detected early on a missile that came out that had a unique feature on it that you read about in the book that was unique. And there were some numbers. And I did the calculus. I said, they're producing a different kind of missile here. And then I actually took that and broke it down to exactly how many they were producing, how many went out. And I said, there's 3 of those in the factory, and the Russians are going to get them out before the X-ray system on. And I was 100% right. Those were the last 3 missiles of the production batch of the Syrena. Those missiles were shipped out in March. They did their final tests, and then they sent 9 to a new regiment that was activated in December of 1990. So that the dead hand was back up to speed. So the dead hand is real. Is there anything like that in the West? Not that I'm aware of. And if I was aware of it, probably couldn't talk about it. But I'm being honest when I say I don't know. I don't know if we have something similar to that. I don't know if the French do. I don't know if anybody does. I'm under the impression that the perimeter system, the dead hand system, is a unique system to the Soviet Union and to Russia. But I don't know about Western capabilities in that regard.
Okay. And there we go. James Benjamin. Scott, your belief is that the U.S. engaged in an active war with Germany regarding the Nord Stream pipeline. But is this really the case if the German government consented to it? It really seems like they have consented.
Well, as a German politician said on the floor the other day in chastising Schultz, they are constitutionally required to look out for the security of the German people. So you can't consent to illegality. That's just that's just common sense. If the law is the law, you can't consent to have it broken because that's against the law. So there's no way the German government could legally consent. What could happen is the German government could commit treason. And that's what we're talking about. So let's not try and play games where we give them an off here. If the German government knew about this and didn't do anything about it, then they've consented to an act of aggression, which is a violation of the Constitution. They've broken the law, and they should be tried as traitors. So I'm not giving the German government a pass on this.
Why would they do that, though? Would they be paid off?
Well, let's reverse engineer this just a little bit. We know that the NSA intercepted the private phone calls of Angela Merkel. Why would we do that? There's a couple reasons why. One, because we want to get insight into what she's thinking about certain, policies, et cetera. So we want to get the scoop because we don't trust our ally to tell us the truth, apparently. The other one is to get compromising information, to find out if she's having an affair, if she's corrupt and all that. And then what do we do with that compromising information? We blackmail people. That's what we do. And I'll give you an example. I'm not saying that we actually had files on these people. I'm not saying they were guilty of anything, but there's at least two instances that they have admitted to. One is the Brazilian head of the OPCW when it was first created. He wanted to, in an effort to stop the war, have the OPCW, have Iraq join the OPCW, and so that OPCW inspectors could go into Iraq and oversee the chemical weapons aspect of it to assuage concerns that Iraq had reconstituted this. And John Bolton approached him and said, "We have a file on you. And if you do this, I will destroy you. I will go after you. I will go after your children, etc." Bustami, I think his name was. But so he said, no, they came straight in and they tried to blackmail me. Hans Blix, the same thing. Hans Blix was preparing to issue a report about Iraqi compliance, and Bolton came to him and basically said, this is the file we have on you, and this is what we want to do. Now, they've both admitted, I have no idea what was in the file, and I don't even know if what was in the file is true. But what I'm saying is, this is proof positive that the United States collects information of a potentially compromising nature on international figures, and then we use it to blackmail them to get them to do what we want. Now we look at Olaf Scholz. This is a man, I knew what was going on. If you remember when Biden first said, I'm going to destroy the pipeline, Olaf Scholz was in the room with them. Now, any leader with any cojones would have listened to the president and said, no, Mr. President, back off. That's German infrastructure. You will not attack that. If you do that, we're done. In fact, screw you. I'm leaving right now. I'm kicking your ambassador out. I'm kicking you out of the bases. We're done with you. You don't get to threaten me in public. It's sort of one of that, that movie that we all see at Christmas time.
It's a Wonderful Life.
No, with Hugh Grant. Love Actually.
Love Actually.
There's that scene where Hugh Grant does exactly that to Billy Bob Thornton, who's playing this George Bush equivalent, and he stands up and he speaks, "You're not a real friend," and all that, and everybody's cheering. That never happens because in real life, the Hugh Grant character would have a file this thick of all of his, all the sins he's committed in life, and he will be silent because he can't speak out because he'll be ruined. We have files on everybody, and that's why I think Schultz is quiet. The people who are speaking out haven't been compromised yet. That the people who are silent, it's because they will be ruined if they open their mouth.
Well, I guess I would get in trouble if I were to say who would ever have an affair with Merkel. So I will not say that. But I get the logic, the blackmail logic. Klaus Vatny. Just reading the rest of that. Let's just say Klaus. Could it be that the and thank you for your contribution, Klaus. We appreciate it. Could it be that the politicians of today in the EU no longer have a loyalty to their nations, but is an elite group that work in a global agenda?
Yes, 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 and yes. All you have to do is look at the European Commission, look at the European Parliament, and you have people that have lost national identity. Even though they're elected by a national constituency, when they show up, they have a European agenda. And that's problematic because you forget who you are. You forget about Germany. You forget about France. You become Eurocentric, and you lose loyalties. And the end result is you get there's divide and conquer. The United States comes in and, we don't believe in European unity. We believe in dominating the world. And so the whole concept, and again, I'm going through one of these transformative moments of my analytical life where Michael Hudson is now somebody I pay attention to. And a key argument there is the weakening of Europe, that it is, I hate conspiracy theories, but the conspiracy that we have promoted the European Union because we felt that the Union would be weak because of what we talked about. When people are focused on Eurocentric approaches, they forget to be German, they forget to be French, they forget to be Italy. And then we can exploit those divides by, saying, well, he's European, but you're really Italian. And we create these divisions because that's what the CIA does for a living. They have an entire unit that does this political action. They work for the Special Activities Division. Geez, they buy off elections. Imagine that. Recently, too, don't believe me, believe Ed Snowden. He released the files that show that we bought a whole bunch of French politicians. We bought a whole bunch of Italian politicians. Oh, gosh, that's right. We're allies with the French and the Italians. No, we're not. We're not allied with anybody. Look what we did to Nordstream. We attacked our ally. We spy on our allies. We blackmail our allies. America's friends to nobody. But I think what the judge, was it Klaus, the guy who asked the question? Yeah, I think he's spot on. And it's a problem that manifests itself not just politically but militarily. I mean, when I joined the Marine Corps, I joined the United States Marine Corps. I was, and will always be a hyper patriotic kind of guy. It's a weakness. I get it. I know some people are like repulsed by that. Sorry, man. I was raised that way.
Jarhead, you.
Yeah, I can't change. But I love my country and I'll die for my country. I believe in America. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing right now. A lot of people don't understand. What motivates me to do what I'm doing right now is love of country. I'm not anti-American. I am as pro-American as you can get. But to be pro-American means I buy into the potential of America, the promise of America, what we should be, what we could be, but what we're not. And therefore, as an American patriot, my job is to make my country better. And I'm trying to do so within the limited capabilities of this. But there's people right now that they don't believe in anything. The Germans who don't believe in Germany, French who don't believe in France, Italians who don't believe in Italy. And they don't even believe in Europe. They don't know what to believe. They just are lost souls, lost citizens. And it makes the whole continent weaker, lesser. One of the interesting things about traveling to Europe, and I did a lot of travel to Europe back before, the Eurozone. One, it was pretty cool to go from one country to the other and just see the different currencies. I know that's economically, it doesn't matter, but it was pretty cool to go from Germany and then you go to France and you get the franc and you look at the different currencies and you sort of see, the decorations, not the decorations, but how they make their money, what symbols they put on their money. And it tells you a lot about the country. And so you spend a lot of time looking at the money, trying to figure out, what's important to them, what symbols are important, et cetera. Because every country was different. Every country had a different history. Every country had different people. It was fascinating. That's what made Europe so cool. When I got the Euro pass as a kid, I would get on a train and literally just go all over Europe. And I saw the whole thing. And it was wonderful because of the diversity, because of the differences. And now in Europe, it's the same. When you go to Ireland, it's the same as if you go to England. It's the same if you go to France. I mean, there are some differences, but they're trying to basically smooth this crap out, and that's boring. And who's going to be loyal to something boring? And so you have armies right now that are composed of people that don't believe in the country of that they're wearing the uniform of. And if you don't believe in the country, you ain't going to die for the country. That's just a statement of fact. And this is why Europe is weak right now, because what is Europe? Who believes in Europe? What is Germany? Apparently the Germans don't believe in Germany right now because they allowed themselves to be attacked. At least Americans believe in America. Whether you hate us, the bottom line is a lot of people out there don't like America, and you have reason to, but I'll tell you this, we love our country. We love our country.
And I believe in Switzerland too, my new favorite country.
Well, you're Switzerland. Yeah, you're Swiss.
Swiss wine. Kevin Provost.
They used to be neutral, but they're not anymore.
This wine isn't neutral, baby. Given the intransience to diplomacy of the political class in Ukraine and USA, do you predict a military coup in Ukraine? How long will they die for a lost cause?
Diet Coke went down the wrong way. Just a second. I have to make sure I'm not.
Take your time, Scott. Hey, while Scott's choking, I'll remind folks that the world premiere of his speech, the Rage Against the War Machine speech he would have delivered in person at the Lincoln Memorial, will be a webcast presentation this Sunday at 12 noon, which is 30 minutes prior to the scheduled start of the rally in Washington. And you're going to Washington too, I heard you say it on another podcast, but not to the rally.
Yeah, I'm going to go I already made the plans, so I'm going down there. I have family down there, I have friends down there, and I'm not going to let this unpleasantness spoil my ability to have pleasantness.
You should bring your a bullhorn and do your own rally. Just go out there and on a soapbox and see if you can beat the crowd they have.
Well, I think some in the crowd might want to beat me. And that's half the issue right now. We're supposed to be going to an anti-war rally. And when you have people sending you memes of throwing you into a wood chipper, when you get multiple death threats per day, man, that doesn't sound very, was that a whip you just hit me with?
Yeah.
All right. Hey, also just Jeff, could you help me out here? Next time I want to take my hand and knock it on the desk to make a point.
Yeah.
Tell me not to, because it hurts. I think I hurt my knuckles. But
all right.
Okay, so go back to the question. The question was, there it is. I got it. I have been saying for some time now that I believe that this is going to end with a military coup against Zelensky. I believe that the Zelensky government will eventually lose all credibility amongst not just the corrupt ruling elite, but the military in particular, which is going to feel betrayed by this. I think there will be a coterie of generals who will give Zelensky the opportunity to leave the country, or they'll kill him. That this isn't going to end well for Zelensky. That's just exactly what I believe. Now, are those generals? Here's the problem. Who will those generals be that make that choice? Are they going to be Azov, meaning Nazis who want to fight to the death? Or are they going to be the Zaluzhny types, Ukrainian patriots who are interceding because the war is lost, it's a lost cause, and they want to stop the death and suffering? So we don't know that outcome. Some people say that you shouldn't wish for this because you may get something worse than Zelensky. Other people, like myself, tend to believe that patriots will rise to the cause and take matters into their own hand. But no matter what, whoever replaces him isn't going to be. Again, one of the interesting things about this interview I had with Zarov, because this is a guy who actually runs, he created the Ukrainian government in exile. So the Viktor Yanukovych government that was illegally ousted has basically reformed in Russia and are prepared to step in and govern Ukraine, et cetera. And he said, I said, well, is that going to be immediate? And he said, no. He said, there's going to be a 2 to 3 year period where Ukraine is going to be governed by the equivalent of martial law. And during this period of time, there will be extensive denazification. extensive denazification. That doesn't mean they're going to execute people in the street, but they're going to be arresting a lot of people and putting them on trial for crimes against humanity, etc. There will be a Nuremberg type trial, but after 3 years, after they've purged these people, they will hold elections, democratic elections, and they're going to let the thing he said, it was curious because I was like, well, of course, Moscow is going to handpick the next leader of Ukraine. He said, no, that would be the worst thing in the world. The Ukrainian people have to pick the leadership of Ukraine. And so there will be free elections in Ukraine, and the Ukrainian people are going to elect their next leadership. He said, now, they will be constrained. They aren't going to be able to elect somebody who wants to join NATO. That's taken off the table. But they will be electing the leader. The idea that Russia is going to sit here and put their hand-picked person in charge is off the table. And who's telling me that? But the former prime minister of Ukraine, who is one of the guys involved in the Ukrainian government in exile. And it's not he who's going to run it. He's making it clear. He's not the next leader of Ukraine. Neither is anybody in Russia. They might be part of an interim government that is going to manage Ukraine through the denazification period, 2 to 3 years. But after that, once Ukraine has been denazified, there will be free elections so that the Ukrainian people, denazified, will elect their own representatives. And I just thought that, I mean, here's the thing, man. What I just told you, that's the kind of stuff that should be on CNN. That's the kind of stuff that should be on MSNBC, should be on Fox. It should be, headline news. But nobody in the West is asking these questions. Nobody in the West is interviewing these people.
No, people instead are concerned about whether or not Don Lemon is getting along with his co-hosts on their new morning show. This is the big issue in cable.
Is he?
No, he's not.
Good.
You mean you're not up on that? That's a great soap opera. Let's do one more question to make up for starting 5 minutes late, which, by the way, was my fault. Don't blame it on the weapons inspector. Question.
I was expecting my email going, where's the link? Where's the link?
I failed. I admit it. Whip for Jeff. Hang on a second there. All right. Final question for Scott Ritter. How unusual. A question for Scott. I'm glad you specified that instead of one of our other guests. As you may know, President Raisi is in China, and I heard that China wants to buy 15,000 drones from Iran. Is a second war after Russia, Ukraine on the way between China and the U.S.? We may have to have a grammatical requirement for these questions.
No, I understand what he's saying.
All right.
First of all, I can't confirm that that China wants to buy 15,000 drones. And what I'm going to say is this. I'll answer it this way. China is concerned about a potential conflict with the United States over Taiwan. There's no doubt about that. Anybody who is a military professional is studying the conflict in Ukraine and understanding that drones are playing a huge role in this conflict. It's revolutionary in nature. And it's expanded. There was heavy use of drones early on. The Turkish drone, the TB2, got a big thing. You see all these private little drones coming up, but there are drones out there we don't even know about. For instance, and the Russians, though, they admitted it. They said, we were remember how General Cavoli said we couldn't conceive of what was happening in terms of the scope and the intensity and the scale of the fighting. Well, the Russians have admitted they couldn't conceive how drones would be actually used in a large-scale ground combat in Europe. They had one vision, and the Russians said, we were wrong. What we were planning on doing was insufficient to the task, that we had to totally revamp our approach to drone warfare, which is why they went to Iran, because the Iranians have been doing drone warfare for some time and doing it pretty damn good. Remember when they shut down Saudi Arabian oil production for a while, drone attack. They're very good at this. And so Russia sent some experts over and evaluated specific drone technologies that filled the gaps that Russia hadn't thought of when they were doing their own drone capability. So, Russia found out they had certain operational gaps. So they bought Iranian drones, and they are now producing those drones. And the interesting thing about the Russians is that they're very innovative. And again, they take the Iranian drone, the Shahed 136, they call it the Geranium 2, and they start employing it. And it's very successful. But then they start saying, what if we tried this? They made it better. And then the Ukrainians responded by doing this, and the Geranium was, so what? The Ukrainians did this. What if we do that? And next thing you know, there are several iterations of this Shahed 136 Geranium 2 that have been improved and improved and improved and improved. So you can't even recognize that what's flying today over Ukraine is not the original model. It's an advanced model, and drone warfare requires this to happen. As people come up with countermeasures, you have to come up with your own countermeasures, and it's constantly evolving, which tells you a couple things. One, drone warfare is an integral part of any future conflict. And if you're not prepared to use drones, you're probably going to lose. So China has drone capability, but China's drones have never been tested in combat. China has theoretical. So China's looking at Russia and probably even talking to the Russians saying, what are you doing? What's the electronic warfare capabilities here? How do you jam this? What do you use for decoy? How do you, come in and trying to hit out a radar, but how do you do it so that you're not tracking consistently? You shut everything down, then you open it up for a second. All these little things that they're talking about, and the Russians are telling them, the Chinese are tweaking, and the Chinese are going, it's probably going to take us about 5 years to develop some of this capability, but Iran's already doing it. So why not go to Iran and say, hey, help us fill this gap? And so there's no doubt in my mind that the Iranians and the Chinese are coordinating on drone technology, using lessons learned from Russia and adapting those lessons in the technology to a potential conflict against the United States and Taiwan. There's no doubt in my mind that's happening. Specific numbers, I don't know. Specific types, don't know. Did they actually do it? Don't know, but it makes sense. So I think the story is probably, accurate in the sense that Raisi is talking, or at least the people with Raisi are talking to their Chinese counterparts about collaboration with drones, and that China will probably be purchasing, specific technologies from the Iranians to evaluate, and then if they like it, to incorporate. That's what I think.
All right. Well, that does it for this week's edition of Ask the Inspector. I'd like to remind folks that Scott has a new article out on our Substack about Seymour Hersh and what Scott considers his best work ever. You can read that article at scottritterextra.com. And of course, Scott's post links to Seymour Hersh's article, so you can check that out as well. And Scott will be streaming his speech this Sunday at 12 noon on our usual channels, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, and Rumble. And for the specific links, you can go to scottritterextra.com. Those of you who are watching on YouTube and Facebook right now, you know where to find us. And Ann, do you feel like coming on to say hi so that we can introduce you to the audience and vice versa? Look at you. You're ready. That's Ann Moss.
I'm ready.
Thank you so much.
Hello, all.
No. Yeah, and if you're going to be on the show, you got to speak like this. Hello.
Well, actually, Scott, what you don't know is that Ann has COVID now. She's in the process of recovering from COVID.
I have been coughing.
Yeah. Now, is this COVID able to jump to us through the computer?
I think so. So
okay. So I got to get a mask.
Yeah, I should be. I guess I should be wearing a mask.
No. Well, I hope you feel better soon. I mean, COVID's not fun. So sorry you got it, and thank you for coming here despite that. And get well soon.
Thanks.
Jeff, shame on you. Shame on you for making her work with COVID. And we need to unionize. We need to unionize.
I'm going to go out and protest.
Union. That's right.
All right, so join us on Sunday for Scenes from the Evolution with Tori Mansfield, Kevin Michelizzi, and myself. Also, Scott and I will be back next Tuesday for the lightning round. That's the version of Ask the Inspector, with Scott answering all questions in 3 minutes or less. Thanks to our beloved audience. We appreciate your support very much. And thanks to you, my favorite weapons inspector. have a good trip down to Washington and be careful.
Thanks, Jeff.